We have to start with Rachel Reeves. Much as it pains me to do so, we have a few clips of Rachel Reeves.
Yes.
Let's start off with, shall we, with Beth Rigby grilling her on Sky News.
Does it hurt you to be described as...
In the manifesto, you criticised the Conservatives for taking the tax burden to a 70-year high. What is it now?
No, that's not a very good start. Is this the best we can do? Have you got another clip that we can actually play? How about Rachel Reeves saying that she's an economist?
Well, I'm an economist. I studied economics. I got a master's in economics from the London School of Economics, and I worked as an economist at the Bank of England.
That's one. Let's have Reeves on her CV.
Why did you say that you'd worked at the Bank of England for a decade when, in fact, it was... Well, it wasn't even 6 years, it was 5. I mean, that's exaggeration, isn't it?
Well, I worked at the Bank of England for 6 years, between 2000 and 2006. I was employed by the Bank of England, including I spent just over a year at the British Embassy working in the economics section there, supporting the government and the bank.
Why did you say it was a decade?
Well, I think you're taking... it's one interview. I worked at the Bank of England for 6 years. I worked for then at Halifax Bank of Scotland, I think, for 3 years after that. I became an MP when I was 31. But I think in the end, people want to judge me on the job that I'm doing today as Chancellor of the Exchequer. I'm qualified to do this job. But in the end, people are going to judge me. Am I growing the economy? Am I improving their living standards? And I'm determined to do just that.
Yeah, well, let's judge her on whether she's growing the economy. Is she growing the economy? Benedict Spence.
I suspect, in fact, that this is not the thing that she wants to be judged on, because, no, she's not growing the economy.
She's not growing the economy. Is she making people better off?
No, she's certainly not making me feel better off.
I think what people will also judge her on is why she's told a whole tissue of lies about where she came from. You know, I was talking to Mark Littlewood about this yesterday, who I met on the Tube after he'd been on Julie Hartley-Brewer's show. And we were just saying, you know, why would you lie about it? Why, if you knew that you were going to be Chancellor of the Exchequer, or if you knew that you were going to become an MP and a fairly high-profile individual, why would you lie about what you'd done? You know, to be monstered by Richard Madeley is really something. When he asks her, what did you do? Why did you say you were there for 10 years when you were only there for 6? And it turns out now she was only there for 5.5 years, 1 year of which she spent at the London School of Economics studying economics and becoming an economist. I don't understand the mentality. It seems to me that only a sociopath would actually lie about her background.
I think what I would say is that in Westminster circles, I think that there is a culture of exaggeration that is sort of seen as perfectly acceptable. You're just sort of bigging yourself up. You're just making yourself appear as confident and sort of bold as possible, and that's considered acceptable. Whereas, of course, in most walks of life, if anything, the average Brit is looking at their CV going, "Ooh, I ought to tone this down. I feel a little bit ashamed."
I had lunch yesterday with a friend of mine who happens to be my accountant, and I put it to him, and I said, look, if somebody came to you to work in your office who said that they had a degree in, I don't know, business or something like that, and that they'd studied for 5 years at the London School of Economics, and that they'd worked at the Bank of England for 10 years, and it turned out that some of that was not true. I said, would you get rid of them? And he went, yeah, absolutely. If we found out that somebody had faked their CV, if we found out that somebody had given us details that turned out not to be true, either you wouldn't employ them in the first place, or if you found out after you had employed them, you'd simply fire them.
Yeah, it's
in no other walk of life would you get away with this.
That's the real kind of that's the cultural disconnect, if you like, is that the average Brit would consider it. You know, this is all about fair play, doing the hard work, going into everything with everything on the table, and that's how most people get on in life. Whereas actually, it turns out in the sort of the upper echelons, it's nothing to do with that at all. It's actually how much can you take, how much can you get away with without actually having done the hard work.
But do you think that's just politics, though, rather than when you say the upper echelons? I think
that's what. Yeah, that's what I mean. And I think actually, to be honest, I think it's reflected in the performance of politicians generally. If you have people who go into this basically trying to obscure and trying to pull a fast one and feel good about it, and that's very kind of typical Westminster, thick of it kind of culture, why should you then be surprised if the country doesn't work? Because that's who you're being run by.
Forgive me for saying this, but I'm going to say it because I think it's an important word and we can use it. They're just bullshitters, aren't they? I mean, that's what they are.
They are.
They're kidding us that they know what they're talking about. They're kidding us that they know what they're doing. And the bottom line is the country is going down the gurgler because they actually aren't qualified to do the things that they say they can do.
I think that over the last couple of decades, trust in politicians has been eroded because they just can't hide this anymore. You know, once upon without any sort of sound snobbish or elitist about this, once upon a time you'd look at you know, the typical cabinet, and there'd be X number of people who could do all sorts of things, had served in all sorts of different branches of society.
Yeah.
This one could speak Latin, this one could recite all sorts, and they would be very educated. They wouldn't necessarily be the best person for that job, or very good, but there would be a sort of an integrity to the fact that they were the people who'd been put through the ringer. They had worked to get there. Now it really does seem to be... I mean, Rachel Reeves saying, I became an MP at 31. Who's got any business becoming an MP at 31? What have you... Bridget Phillipson, again, no actual sort of professional background, has just worked for the Labour Party
or come through the council system or something like that.
Exactly. You know, the father was an
Rachel
MP
Reeves unusually has actually had a job in the private sector, albeit not a very interesting job and not a particularly important job, but she has had a job in there. But the fact that I'm interested, as I say, in the kind of the process, the psychological process of somebody who just fibs about their background, because you and I, I'm sure, have all known people who do that, and generally speaking, they're people that you wouldn't wish to trust with anything.
No, but that's what politics does attract, and I think there has been a real... Frankly, there's been a failure of our democratic system. People like to talk about, you know, how we have to defend democracy and X, Y, Z. Ours does not, in fact, attract the best people. It doesn't reward the best people. All it is that two major parties are a machine for people who want to be politicians. That's not a good start. Straight off that, you want to be a politician, that should set alarm bells ringing. And, you know, you'd hope that an insurgent new party would take a slightly different approach, which is to say, clear house, don't look for people who actively try to seek to be MPs. We should be going out and seeking the best, the brightest, people who don't necessarily think, oh, a life in public service is for me. Business owners, people who have been successful, who perhaps have retired maybe or thinking about it and think, maybe you'd like to give a little bit back for 5 or 6 years. Not, I want to start off at age 21 as, you know, a bag carrier for an MP, then I want to be a SPAD, then I want to be an MP. You know, but there are so many people in that kind of pipeline. They go to the right university, they just get the right position because they joined the right university society.
Well, some of them might even have just been a National Union of Students and got on with each other like that.
Exactly.
But this is a BBC investigation, by the way, which is perhaps the most surprising thing. And the BBC, I will say, and I don't say it very often, have done a great job of actually looking into Rachel Reeves' time.
That's how you know you're in trouble.
I know. Working for this this job that she had in the Customer Relations Department of HBOS, and this was back in 2009. There were whistleblowers. There was a 6-page complaint about the number of expenses that she may or may not have got herself involved in. Inappropriate spending is said to have included lavish dinners, taxis, gifts, including for each other. She was part of this small team where they obviously went out for dinner, and everyone went, I'll tell you what, I'll sign this off if you sign yours off, and I'll buy you a gift, because they had some reward scheme working for this organisation, but they basically rewarded each other. Mrs Reeves is said to have bought a £152 handbag on expenses as a Christmas gift for her boss in 2008, and the boss signed off on her expense claim. I mean, that sounds to me to be, on the very face of it, to be at least corrupt, possibly in terms of the inland revenue, even actually criminal. Other expense-funded purchases by Ms Reeves are said to have included perfume, jewellery and wine. Treasury sources said the Chancellor was not aware of any investigation into her conduct at HBOS, and she left the bank on good terms when it was restructured after the financial crisis. She basically got fired, right? It was not just restructured, she was let go. Kerry Badenoch has urged her to come clean. I mean, the whole thing is riddled with sleaze, with a stench of corruption, and it's not that important on the face of it, but because of who she is and because of the job that she's got, you know, it's very important. And according to Guy Adams, he's written a big piece in the Mail today, when I put these claims to Reeves' office months ago, they were sharply refuted. Today, such denials must be taken with a pinch of salt. So this is a story that's not going away.
Yeah, and do you know what? We talked about this at the start of this Labour government, which was that there's been very little scrutiny from amongst a lot of the mainstream press placed on Labour, because it's just so much fun kicking the Tories. Justified and also very easy. But there just wasn't the scrutiny going into Labour. And then, of course, straight off the bat, the Lord Alley story, there was even, you know, tail end of the election.
As soon as they got in, there was the Lord Alley story,
Yeah, Angela Rayner's housing issues. All sorts of stuff just started coming out of the woodwork. The second a lot of journalists decided, OK, well, the Tories are gone. Who are these new people? people. Oh, I say, there's rather a lot here, isn't there? And it does just feel as if it's just been a constant sort of, as well as the economic
There's been no end to it.
As well as the political incompetence, there is also the personal stuff. And you just go, for heaven's sake, be one or the other. Be good at policy or bad at policy. Be squeaky clean or be a little bit dodgy. But pick one. Don't be all of these things at once. My word.
I mean, she comes across in this whole story and this whole scenario as a bit of a shyster, basically. And she has done what everybody knows is the final sort of act of ignominy when you get, just before you get kicked out of office. She's made page 1 of the Daily Star, which I have here, and it's got the Chancellor's Pinocchio CV, right? And, I mean, once the Star have got around to you, you're really in trouble. From 1952 to 2022, I was the Queen of England, it says. In 1966, I scored a hat-trick to help England win the World Cup. In 1969, I was the first man to walk on the moon, and in 1989, I invented the World Wide Web. I mean, they're literally just laughing at her, as we are. In 2025, I'm learning my 4 times and 7 times tables. I mean, she is a laughing stock.
True.
She is a laughing stock of the country. Forget for a second the fact that there is zero growth. Yesterday we found out in the final quarter of last year there was 0.1%, which again is pretty much flatlining. There is no hope for the economy in this country. It's going to get worse before it gets better. April's coming, where more companies are going to have to retract because they're paying more in national insurance. You know, the woman is an absolute and utter unmitigated disaster.
Yeah. She'll survive. She'll get to do the next budget, I think. And then,
I think she doesn't last through the summer.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think she gets to the budget because Starmer needs somebody to blame when that goes wrong, and she is a busted flush anyway.
She is.
And then it really is just a question of who goes first.
Yeah.
Her, or is it David Lammy says something really stupid at the UN or something like that? You know, which, to be fair, very likely to
happen. And literally any second.
Yeah.
I'm going to try and replay that Beth Rigby clip that we didn't have earlier. Did we have that? Or do we not have it?
In the manifesto, you criticised the Conservatives for taking the tax burden to a 70-year high. What is it now at the end of this Parliament after your budget? What will it be?
I'm going to be really straight with people. The tax burden overall goes up. But
What's
we've
it go
made
up
decisions.
To, from where?
It's the highest burden of tax I recognise.
I mean, I'm going to be really straight with people. No, you're not. You've never been straight with anybody. You weren't even straight with the Prime Minister. You haven't been straight with anyone since you were born. You've fiddled your expenses. You've lied about your CV. You've pretended that you did jobs that you didn't do. How are you straight with the people?
Yeah, when you start a sentence by saying, I'm going to be straight with people, and people will go, well, that's a change. Thanks for that. I'm not going to believe it.
It's like whenever you're talking to anybody who goes, let me be really honest about this, and you just go, really? Really? Do you think so? Should we remind ourselves of Keir Starmer, who has been in the firing line this week? Yesterday we had some fun with imagining what Starmer Grad would be like. This was Starmer's new kind of, idea for new towns to be built all over Britain. You know, migrant drop-in centres here, Lord Alley free gear clothing shops over there, lots of cycle lanes, lots of speed bumps, lots of ULEZ cameras and all that. But here he was getting very excited about the fact that Rachel Reeves is in fact a woman.
When Rachel Reeves stands up, she will be making history. And I can tell you, young women and girls across the country will be watching, they will look up, and they will notice.
And they'll go, as I said before, Jesus Christ, how did this woman get a job? She's completely useless, right?
I'm sorry, it's the worst advert for feminism.
It
honestly.
really is.
If you were going to go, this is the groundbreaking moment, and everybody sits there and go, well, we're never doing that again, then are we?
No, I said this yesterday. I mean, Caroline Leavitt, the new White House press secretary, now that's a woman that women and girls can look up to and go, oh my God, she's really good at what she does. Look at her commanding that room, absolutely batting people away who have been veteran journalists in the White House for years and years and years and years. And she seems to be supremely confident, incredibly good at her job. Rachel Reeves is the exact opposite of that.
I don't know what it is. Might just be because it's sort of the centre of global power, the global empire. But the United States does seem to just do politicians these days. Even Hillary Clinton was at least competent in her evil. Right. At the very least, you would look at her and, Kamala Harris was so unusual because she was completely incompetent. But that was just the Biden administration. Right. Apart from that, actually, the US just seems to churn out much more impressive people, even the nutters, even the lunatics. Even the latest Kennedy. He's going to get stuff done. Right. Whereas ours just sort of, well, nothing
He's an impressive figure, isn't he?
Yeah, exactly. Whereas ours just sort of declines very slowly.
They just appear on TV and they say nothing. Of course, they don't appear on this show because I think they're boycotting us without actually telling us. Yeah. But, there we are. I can live with that.
Did you hear the Defence Secretary responding to the new US Defence Secretary when he was talking about Ukraine?
No.
He just his response was to just go, we hear you and we are committed to, this. And you're just thinking, You haven't got a clue. You haven't got a clue what to... unless an American tells you what to do.
Although John Healey's actually not a bad guy. I suspect he's been knackered by Keir Starmer, who's told him not to say anything.
But that's the point. He, and maybe Wes Streeting, up to a point you're going, they're not bad. But that's actually because the standard is just so low. Yeah. And you do just feel very sorry for some of them.
Let's go back to the beginning of the week. You know, that woman Ashley, whatever her name is, Dalton, I think, who's been made the new health minister in the wake of Andrew Gwynn being fired, who wasn't particularly great either. Suddenly you've got a woman who's in the government responsible for what happens in hospitals, who thinks that we don't need gender-specific toilets, who thinks that you can identify as a llama, and who basically thinks that as a woman you can have a penis. That's where we are.
Honestly, the US is stripping out this stuff right now with this, this Doge thing. They're absolutely stripping out all the faulty wiring, all the rubbish, LGBTQ plus, everything can be a rainbow plastering. It's all going. And we're going to be sat here for 5 years watching it happen until something can be done about that.
Yeah.
I'm
continuing to try and destabilise them to the point where they have to somehow just leave and walk away.